probably the last American president was John F. Kennedy. The assassination of John F. Kennedy, and then later in 1968, Robert F. Kennedy, very close to when Martin Luther King was also assassinated in 1968, that spelled the end of the American presidency. You do not have an American presidency if the president can be illegally removed and then the evidence of the conspiracy to kill that president, to assassinate that president, is covered up. Why do those records need to be made classified for decades if John F. Kennedy was really assassinated by a lone nut acting alone, as we're told? If a lone nut assassinated John F. Kennedy, why do you need to make all these thousands of documents about the Kennedy assassination classified for 75 years? And still some of them are redacted and you can't have access to them. Why? What about a lone nut necessitates a national security policy to cover up the documents surrounding the assassination of John F. Kennedy? John F. Kennedy was clearly assassinated by a cabal, an illegal conspiracy to remove the President of the United States in plain sight, in front of the people, in a traumatizing way, and then to cover it up. To cover it up with the Warren Commission, headed by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, with members of the panel who later became president and members of the panel who were in charge of the CIA. If that panel covered up the evidence of a conspiracy, then it wasn't just a low-level operation. It wasn't just low-level thugs that killed the president. The cover-up shows that it was very high level. The assassination of President Kennedy shows the end of democracy and the presidency in the United States. You could argue all the way back to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, but there was a struggle going on, and I would argue that by the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the illegal cabals that were doing these assassinations started to get the upper hand. Then when Robert F. Kennedy was selected by the people to be the Democratic Party representative running for president in 1968, the day that he achieved that nomination, won the primary in California, he was assassinated that night in 1968. And the assassination of Martin Luther King also shows the removal of democracy in the United States. So President's Day should be a day that we look at this assassination of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and realize what has gone on. As soon as John F. Kennedy was killed, the Vietnam War was escalated. John F. Kennedy had signed memorandums to remove the advisors from Vietnam, bring all American advisors back from Vietnam, not put any combat troops. He wanted to get everybody back by Christmas. He was assassinated in November of 1963. Immediately, the very unpopular escalation of the war in Vietnam began as soon as John F. Kennedy was assassinated. The fact that the American people were overwhelmingly against what was going on in Vietnam, and yet the leaders would not listen to the people, shows that you have a situation in which it's no longer a democracy. And then the Manson killings, so-called Manson killings, the Sharon Tate murders, the Tate LaBianca murders, that were clearly, there's a lot more going on in that. I've made a video about that, analyzing Quentin Tarantino's film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, talking about the lie that was sold to the American people about the Manson killings that was done to help derail the popular movements that were protesting against the war. The establishment was infiltrating using operations like Operation Chaos in the CIA and COINTELPRO in the FBI. They were actively infiltrating citizens groups, and Tom O'Neill does an encyclopedic, monumental, heroic work in his book, Chaos, exposing the fact that the Manson killings were orchestrated. They were an operation of these secret police force intelligence agencies, that Manson and the Manson family were protected and allowed to get away with running prostitution rings, chop shops on stolen vehicles, stolen credit cards, having automatic weapons, running around with automatic weapons fire, and they were never arrested, and they were allowed to continue. It was part of a operation to slander and smear the people's movement against the Vietnam War, and it was a turning point in American history. So this is showing the fact that you do not have a democracy. If you can put together a citizens group that's against, let's say, the Vietnam War, or against racial discrimination, and then secret police operations like the FBI, COINTELPRO, infiltrate those groups, like they infiltrated the Black Panthers to try and subvert and get the different factions to fight against each other and self-destruct. If you've got government secret police infiltrating citizens groups, which was clearly happening, then you do not have a democracy. And so this was a major turning point. I suggest everybody take a close look at that operation. Take a look at my video that I made back in June of last year about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, talking about the Manson operation and what was going on and why that's so important still today. Then there's just so many examples we could show as we're talking about President's Day. The Iran-Contra scandal under Ronald Reagan. This picture was taken in 1982. That's Ronald Reagan and Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. The people were against giving weapons to the Contras to help overthrow and fight against the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, and the people's representatives passed different laws to prevent giving of weapons to these death squads. The Contras were absolute death squads, and so the Congress passed different laws, and the administration kept going around those laws. In 1982, the same year this picture was taken, Congress passed the Boland Amendment preventing the giving of arms and aid to the Contra death squads, and yet the President Reagan and his team went around the Congress and secretly were giving weapons and aid to the Contras, and it all started to unravel when one incident was the shooting down of this C-123 aircraft that was running guns down to the Contras. It was shot down by the Nicaraguan Sandinistas with a Soviet air defense missile, and only one survivor, Eugene Hassenfuss, former Marine who was flying it, jumped out and made it down to safety under a parachute, and he was captured by the Sandinistas, and the plane was full of weapons. They were running weapons, and they probably weren't coming back with empty aircraft either. They were probably coming back with aircraft full of cocaine to secretly fund the Contras. So if your government is secretly, or elements of your government, against the will of the Congress, and the president's team are secretly running guns and running drugs and doing it against the will of the Congress, against the will of the American people, do you really have a presidency? And then, of course, there's just so many examples we could bring up. The absolute obscenity of September 11th, 2001, and what we were told happened, which absolutely, the government story that they're still pushing is completely against the evidence of what happened on that day. And yet the September 11th bringing down of those towers in the World Trade Center, not just two towers, several towers in the World Trade Center were destroyed by controlled demolition. That whole canard, that whole lie has been used to ratchet down security when you go through the airport. Still to this day, now you have all this security and identity that's being required to do air travel and travel around between, one place and another by airplane because of this. But of course, even more horrific, this whole lie about September 11th was used to launch these illegal wars that are still going on, toppling one government after another, all in the name of a lie about what happened on September 11th. This is what we should be thinking about on President's Day, because the American people don't actually have a president if the president is violating the Constitution, if the president is conducting treason, if the president is not listening to the will of the people, and if the social contract is not being upheld. If your government, if the towers at the World Trade Center were brought down in a different way than the government is telling the people that they were brought down, that is a violation of the social contract. And the American people are the ones that need to put a stop to it. It's really the American people that need to wake up here. The rest of the world can look at this and agree with what I'm saying and say, yeah, this is awful. The American people are the ones that need to wake up, because it's the American people that are enabling these ongoing wars in the Middle East, including the ongoing genocide in Gaza that is being done by Israel, but with the full support of the United States military-industrial complex. President Biden, I don't think he's actually in charge of anything. If you look at the recent numerous gaffes by President Biden, nobody can possibly believe that he's actually in charge of anything. But he's still on record saying, oh yeah, we're trying to get a ceasefire. We're trying to bring this to an end. Absolute lies. If the United States wanted the ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing to stop, the United States could bring that to a stop in one day. Israel does not have the munitions to conduct this all by itself. This is absolutely being supported and enabled by the United States. And so if you want to stop it, you have to stop the United States from supporting it, encouraging it, and enabling it. This is not just an Israeli policy, this is a United States policy. It may seem absolutely impossible to do anything about this. The people wanted the Vietnam War to stop. They did massive marches. The Vietnam War continued on. And those peace movements were actively subverted by illegal operations that were subverting Americans' right to freedom of speech, right to peaceably assemble, actively subverting groups that were against the Vietnam War and other policies. It may seem impossible, and yet the ancient myths of the world teach us that we still have to do what's right, regardless of what we think the outcome will be. That's the whole lesson of the Bhagavad Gita. In the ancient epic of Mahabharata, the great hero Arjun says he is full of doubt before this great battle. He's going into this great battle against his cousins led by Dhritarashtra and the Kauravas. And Arjun has all the weapons that he needs to engage in this battle and be successful, and yet Arjun becomes filled with doubt prior to the battle, and he says to Krishna, his divine charioteer, beholding these kinsmen, his cousins on the other side, assembled together and eager for the fight, my limbs become languid and my mouth becomes dry, my body trembles and my hair stands on end. The evil that arises from the extermination of a race, an internecine quarrels between brothers, why should we not? if they don't see it, why shouldn't we see the evil? Oh, Janardana, one of the titles of Krishna, who see the evils of the extermination of a race. We see that genocide is wrong. If they don't see it, why shouldn't we abstain from fighting because we do see the evil of it? Better would it be for me if the sons of Dhritarashtra, that's the opposing side, weapon in hand, should in battle slay me, unavenging, unarmed. He's going to sit down and say, I think I'll sit this one out. I don't care if the guys on the other side, the bad guys, I don't care if they kill me while I'm just sitting here. It's probably better for them to kill me than for me to do something that might be wrong. Having spoken thus on the field of battle, Arjun, his mind troubled with grief, casting aside his bow and arrows, sat down in his car, in the war car. He sits down, and then Krishna gives this speech, this song that is known as the Bhagavad Gita, the song of the Lord Krishna. So Krishna, in answer to what Arjun is doing, Arjun says, I don't think I can do it. I'm filled with doubt. I don't know what the right thing to do is. I think maybe it'd be better for me to just sit it out, even if I just get killed as a non-combatant, rather than engage in a battle. I don't know what the outcome's going to be. I don't know what the right thing to do is. Krishna then gives the Bhagavad Gita. Now this is a commentary by a professor, Professor Mayer, one of the great scholars of Chinese language and literature from Princeton. He did a translation of the Tao Te Ching of China, and in this translation of the Tao Te Ching, he says there's so many important things in the Tao Te Ching of China. He's translating a very ancient text of the Tao Te Ching that was found at Ma Wangdui, and in that translation, right after the Ma Wangdui texts were rediscovered in this tomb at Ma Wangdui, Professor Mayer says, this song of the Bhagavad Gita illuminates some of the things that are being talked about in the Tao Te Ching as well. Some of the things that are a little bit hard to understand in the Tao Te Ching, we can understand them better by borrowing some of the knowledge from the Bhagavad Gita and using that as a spotlight to understand what the Tao is talking about in the Tao Te Ching. So he says in this analysis, the chief lesson Krishna, Lord Krishna, the God Krishna, the non-combatant charioteer, the chief lesson Krishna has to offer Arjun is that altruistic or disinterested action leads to realization of Brahma. That is to say, one should act without regard or desire for the fruits, phala, of one's action. This idea is repeated over and over again in countless different formulations. So, Professor Mayer says, the way to understand the Bhagavad Gita is it's saying over and over in different ways, one should act without regard or desire for the outcome of that action. You should detach from the action and just do what's right. It doesn't mean do whatever you want. It says over and over, do what is right without attachment to the outcome. The outcome may turn out to be failure. The outcome may turn out to be success. But you should still do what's right regardless of fear of failure or desire for the rewards of success. You should just act in a totally unattached way, without regard or desire for the fruits of one's actions. He goes on, these passages in the Bhagavad Gita are of great importance for understanding the enigmatic concept of non-action that is so prominent in the Tao Te Ching. So in the Tao Te Ching, over and over, there's this concept of wu wei, non-action. But it doesn't mean not acting at all. It means acting as if you're not acting. Acting without connection, acting without mind. Wu wei, action with non-connection. Doing what's right, doing the right thing without connection to the outcome. Without a bunch of doubt and a bunch of, oh, this will never work. The Bhagavad Gita helps us understand the Tao Te Ching. Now he's going to quote the Tao Te Ching. The person of superior integrity takes no action says the old master. He's talking about Lao Tzu, Lo Zai, the old man child. Lo Zai means old man, baby. I've talked about this in some of my books. It's celestial. The person of superior action, the person of superior integrity takes no action, says the old master. He prefers to translate Lo Zai or Lao Tzu into old master. Nor has he a purpose for acting. We are told straight away to, quote, act through non-action, and that through non-action, no action is left undone. In spite of the fact that this idea appears a dozen times and is obviously central to the old master's teachings, we can only vaguely surmise from the Tao Te Ching the specific implications of Wu Wei, non-action. So it's been misinterpreted because it's said several times, act through non-action, but what that means is hard to fathom from the Tao Te Ching alone. So some people have maybe misinterpreted it, according to Professor Meyer, but he says, check out the Bhagavad Gita, and when you put those two together, then you understand. It means acting. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means acting, because Arjuna is about to do nothing, and Krishna says, no, that's not right. What you need to do is act without attachment. Act almost as if you're not acting, almost as if you're not taking action. Act with a clear mind, a mind as clear as if you're taking no action. Act through non-action means act without regard for the outcome. So he concludes by saying, when we read the Bhagavad Gita, we discover an exceedingly elaborate analysis of the nature and purpose of non-action. Here's where we get like a really clear understanding of what this is talking about. The ideal of action without attachment is conveyed in many guises throughout the Bhagavad Gita. So what Wu Wei means is action without attachment, according to the distinguished scholar Professor Meyer in his analysis that's found in the appendices of his translation of the Ma Wangdui texts of the Tao Te Ching. So, what does this have to do with us today? We are looking at this horrific genocide and ethnic cleansing that's going on, and like Arjun, we may feel completely overwhelmed. What can we do about it? What should we do about it? We don't even know what to do about it. We don't know what to do about it, but the Bhagavad Gita and the Tao Te Ching say what you should do is what's right without attachment to the outcome. At the very least, we need to be speaking against it. And who knows, maybe our speaking against it will have a positive effect. Maybe it won't, but we still need to do it. That's what it's talking about. Maybe it will, but we should act without attachment to the outcome. That's what the Bhagavad Gita and the Tao Te Ching tell us about life in general, about this battlefield of life, is we've got to act and do what's right, and the best way to do it is without attachment. Now, the ancient myths are about the healing of trauma on the individual level and on the societal level. They act on both levels. And what's really revealing about what's going on in Gaza right now, the trauma that is being inflicted by admittedly traumatized individuals on the side of Israel. Like, I'm not excusing it at all, any more than I excuse child rape. That is a crime that needs to be stopped, and people who do it need to be punished. But it is evidence of trauma, and what's deeply significant about this particular genocide, ethnic cleansing that's going on right now, absolutely needs to be spoken about every single day and needs to be stopped. What's deeply significant about this particular situation is it is being done in the name of a literalistic interpretation of the scriptures of the Bible. So The ancient myths are all about preventing trauma and preventing oligarchy and oligarchies that inflict trauma and steal the resources of other nations. I've spoken about this in other videos. The ancient myths are against that, but when you interpret them literally, you turn their message on its head. You turn their message on its head. The whole occupation of Israel in the modern era is falsely justified by a literalistic interpretation of stories that are not literal. These are metaphorical stories that are about recovery from trauma. And I'll just show this slide from the story of Joseph and his brothers. Just briefly show that this is a celestial story. The 12 children of Israel correspond to the constellations of the zodiac. Now, there's actually more than 12 children of Israel, and that's because they suppress and bury one of their brothers, Joseph. Joseph is actually a higher self figure. The definition of trauma is separation from your own self. This is a painting by James Tissot from the late 1800s, early 1900s, entitled "Joseph Reveals His Dream to His Brethren." Now look at this painting. The children of Israel, we can see from texts such as Genesis 49, correspond to the constellations of the zodiac that the sun travels through. But Joseph in this painting is not among the children of Israel. So let's take he's among them, but he's above them in this painting. Take a look at the stars of the sky. That's the Milky Way. Now look at the smoke from the campfire of the brothers. Look at the Milky Way. Look at the smoke from the campfire. Now I'll move the Milky Way out of the way, but you can still see the bright path of the Milky Way. Now, the path of the zodiac that the sun and the moon and the planets goes through, the background stars, includes these different constellations of the zodiac: Sagittarius, Scorpio, Libra. You can see the two brothers on the far left. They are either in the position of Pisces or of Gemini twins. But the brothers, James Tissot doesn't paint all the brothers. He doesn't paint all 12, but basically they are arrayed like the zodiac. And then just to the side of the smoky fire, the Milky Way, on a little bit of a hillock, on a mound, we have Joseph. Now, there's a constellation called Ophiuchus, and I've talked about this many, many times, whose stars dip down into the path of the zodiac. But Ophiuchus is excluded from the zodiac, just as Joseph gets buried down in a pit by his brothers and then sold off into slavery. Ophiuchus is Joseph, and you can see that in this painting. You see how the foot of Ophiuchus dips down into the path of the zodiac? Now look at Joseph up on the hillock next to the smoke of the fire. His foot dips down among his brothers, who are the zodiac constellations, just like we find in Genesis 49. He's part of the zodiac, but not part of the zodiac. Just as our self, our deeper self, our higher self is not exactly the same as our different defensive parts, but those defensive parts can suppress higher self, and that's exactly what has gone on with someone who talks with such hatred, or someone who commits horrific crimes against children. That is a part who's playing a role that it thinks will keep the system together because of trauma, because of separation from self. So I know this painting doesn't all by itself prove that the Bible is based on the stars, but believe me, I can show abundant proof. The stories of the Bible are based on the stars. The children of Israel are based on the stars. They correspond to specific constellations or groupings of stars. The 12 children of Israel are 12 different groupings or constellations of stars, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 groupings, 12 bunches of Israel, the 12 groupings of stars. They're constellations. They represent something very powerful, parts of who we are, that I talk about in my most recent book, Invoking the Ancient Gods in You. But this whole horrific, traumatic, ethnic cleansing, genocide, mass murder that's going on needs to be stopped. I don't know how to stop it, but the people of the United States need to realize you don't have a president. You can take a day off for President's Day, but there has been a criminal cabal that killed off your president in 1963, then killed off his brother in 1968, inflicted the Vietnam War upon Vietnam against the will of the people. When Martin Luther King spoke out about it, he was assassinated exactly 1 year to the day after he chose to speak out about it. I don't know how to fix the problem, but as the ancient scriptures tell us, such as the Bhagavad Gita, we have to do what's right without attachment to the outcome, without fear of what the outcome might be if it's negative, or without attachment to the outcome if we think it's going to result in gain. We need to do what's right without attachment to the outcome. That's what the myths counsel. The only way to do that really is by getting in touch with self. And that's what the myths are also all about. The myths talk about this. We are in a very dangerous situation in the world today. You've got the United States bombing countries like Yemen and Syria and Iraq in support of what's going on in Israel, all the while claiming to be against what's going on with the massacre of the Palestinians. They're absolutely not against what's going on. They're enabling it. They're bombing other countries in support of it. The people of the world need to rise up and do what they can to stop it. Illegal acts need to be stopped through legal measures. So I don't know what the right measures are, but South Africa bringing the case to the international criminal courts is one way of trying to address it. That needs to continue. We need to do in whatever capacity that we have. We all need to do whatever we can within the capacity that we have to speak out against it and try and put a stop to what's going on. So I hope that this President's Day, the people of the United States will make an outcry against what is going on. And we need somehow to put a stop to it.